Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us in this LinkedIn Live office hours broadcast. Today, we're talking about data visualization and storytelling, and we have tailored this specifically for busy professionals because at the end of the day, we're all running around having very limited time, and if we can pick up a few really important tips and tricks and methods of how to be better at storytelling and how to make sense of the data that we all swim in, our lives will be much, much easier. I'm really pleased that I'm joined by Bill Shander today. Bill is another fellow LinkedIn learning instructor, and his courses are absolutely awesome. I've been doing those in the last few weeks, and I'm absolutely amazed by how well presented the concepts are and how much I have taken away from all of his courses. So I'll give Bill a chance to introduce himself and say hello. If you haven't met me, I am Christina.Charenkova. I love talking about change in any sort of context. On LinkedIn Learning, I have a series of courses talking about organizational change and business analysis. And at the end of the day, we all go through change scenarios and change context. And I love teaching teams and organizations how to deal with change and how to make sense of change and make it easier for people to deal with. Now, without further ado, Bill, welcome. Thank you for spending your time here with us. Please say hello to everyone and introduce a little bit about yourself. How did you get to become an information engineer, if that's what you call yourself? And why is that your passion?
All right. Well, thank you very much, Christina, for having me. And hello, everybody. Yes, I am at the title I tend to use is information designer. And what's funny, though, is that I do engineering. I am like a programmer. I create interactive experiences, but I'm a designer, right? We take information in whatever form and we package it up and make it palatable and understandable to audiences. And that's more of a design task, but they're both absolutely together.
Yeah.
And to your question, why am I so passionate about it? It's probably because I love both ends of that spectrum. I love the technical challenge of some of the things that I do. I love the design challenge of the things that I do. One of the things that I talk about, and I realize I'm answering your question completely out of order, but I'll introduce myself in a moment also. When I talk about what do you have to know to do this work that I do, it's really 4 skills. And the 4 skills are communications, right? You have to really understand how to communicate ideas to people. It is design, right? You're literally designing solutions, including visual design. It is technology. It's executing stuff in tools and creating those things. And then, of course, there is also the data component. You need to have data literacy. And I'm a bit of I don't technically have ADHD, I don't think, but close. Like I definitely one of these people. I like to jump around between a whole bunch of different things, play with ideas, move from the design to the engineering to the data to the this to the that to the writing to the communication. Like I like doing a million things, and so I love what I do. It's a lot of fun. I get very excited about it. In terms of how I got here, so I started my company a little over 30 years ago, and I was doing web design and development. Strangely enough, I mean, not strangely given the time frame.
Yes. Yeah.
And I always had clients who had data. And so I was always doing data visualization and data communications as part of their web projects. And about 10 years ago, I realized that was the fun part and the rest of it wasn't so fun anymore. And that coincided with being approached by lynda.com to do my first course, which became LinkedIn. And I love it. It's just a great place to be.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, what a story. 30 years. That is massive. It's been so good doing your courses and discovering all the different concepts that I think you've picked up throughout all of that, lengthy experience and rich experience that you've had with all sorts of different data. For the sake of our audience, because I think we may be getting people from sort of different backgrounds, would you please define what data is and what data storytelling is? And I think it's really good to start from that foundational level, so making sure that we're all on the same page. What does that mean?
You know what? That first part of that question is one of the hardest questions I've ever gotten that I have not prepared an answer to. Define data. I don't have a good answer for that. I like, this is
Mm,
embarrassing. I should have an answer for that. Like when I think about what data visualization is and what I do with data, okay, what is data? Sometimes it's quantitative data, right? It's a bunch of
yeah,
numbers, whether it's in a
yeah,
spreadsheet or in a database or whatever. But of
yeah.
course, you have qualitative data too, right? You've done a survey and you've asked people to answer a questionnaire, and you have information collected in that way. That's text, not numeric.
Hmm.
And so, data is that's why they use the term information design. It's information collected together that can be analyzed and therefore understood, and from which you can, get insights. And obviously, we use data to make decisions about all kinds of different things. So, it's an incredibly broad term,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And then, yeah, what's data storytelling? I mean, it's like, there's your thing. You have this pile of information in whatever form it's in, quantitative, qualitative, whatever, and we need
Mm,
to communicate it. And we know from thousands of years of history and from research that storytelling is an evolutionary imperative. Humans require story in order to learn from each other. Like
mm,
we crave story, and it's not just for entertainment; it's literally for learning. And so, when we're communicating stuff, data or not, we're better off packaging up it as a story. We know that it's more memorable that way, it's stickier, and we also have more better
mm.
understanding of the information when it's communicated in that form.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. I love the fact that we talk about information as data, because I think all of us in a professional, organizational sort of context, we have access to so much more information nowadays. And sometimes we don't necessarily see the trends. And you almost have to step back and understand where you're going and what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Now, you teach that as part of your courses. How do we, and you call it the whys. And I wanted to touch a little bit on that, because I think it's one of the acronyms that you say. It's a terrible acronym, but you have to. It guides your data storytelling and presentation very well.
Yeah,
Would you please elaborate a little bit on the whys for us?
totally. And if I can just say one other thing about the definition of data to the point that you just made, and this actually reminds me. So Robin Hunt, another LinkedIn Learning instructor who teaches like data analytics, she's awesome. And one time she came and she spoke at a university class that I was teaching,
Mm,
and she just showed a picture, and the picture was of a construction site. And she asked
right.
the students, "What's the data in this picture?" It's just a picture of like a backhoe in a construction site. And
Yeah.
of course, there's endless amounts of data. And so, what's
Mm,
data? Like, yeah, what's on my desk? Well, I have a mug full of hot water.
mm,
I have a thermos full of hot water. I have some
yeah.
glasses, some AirPods, and a hat. Okay,
Yeah.
that's data, right? Like, it is, yeah, data is information. It is everything. Okay, to your question, the quads. So yeah, the quads are these terrible, awful acronyms that I came up with. I'm embarrassed that I continue to use them, except that they're the smartest thing I ever came up with in terms of the ideas,
I think
in
it's
some ways.
brilliant. It just sticks with you. The quiz.
No one ever remembers the actual quads, but they remember
Yes,
the quads, the shorthand, which is good because it is a good shorthand.
that's
um,
right.
yeah, so the quad rhymes with Y, which is the key word here, and the basic idea is they're the three things you need to focus on in order to
Mm,
really communicate anything to anybody. And so the first of the quays is Quidis, Kwydis, bad acronym, but it stands for you have to know what your data is saying. You can't communicate data without understanding your data. And it's important to acknowledge that data understanding is on a spectrum, right? Data scientists at one
yeah,
end
right.
and first graders at the other end. And we're all sort of somewhere in between for the most part.
Yes. Yeah.
So some level of understanding of data in order to communicate your data, that's straightforward. The second of the quays is essentially it's an idea that everybody knows and most of us acknowledge, but we then quickly ignore it and spend the rest of
Mm,
our time ignoring it. So we sort of pay lip service to it and then move on.
right.
And Quyanth is what it is, Kwyanth. It stands for know what your audience needs to hear.
I love that.
And the key word there, let me turn this speaker off. the key word there is need, right? So like
Mm.
my boss asked me for this quarter's sales figures, and okay, boss, here's the sales figures, but really what
Yeah.
she needed was the profits, right? And she didn't just need this quarter; she also needed the year-over-year comparison. She also needed last year, but she didn't mention that. I had to know what she needed, not really listen to just what she asked for.
Mm. Yeah.
And then the third of the quays is the worst one. It's the worst acronym. I apologize, everybody, for this one. Hurwitz, okay? KWY WRTS. Oh my goodness, I can't even spell it. But that one stands for another really important idea, kind of like Quyanth, which is you have to know what you really want to say. And the basic idea there is
Mm.
that I have a point of view. Like I've analyzed this data. I know what's important in this data.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
what I must focus on for you in this particular data
Mm.
story, whether it's a presentation or a dashboard or whatever. And if I lose sight of what I really want to say, I'm not going to communicate effectively. I mean, it just makes sense,
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
it's really important at this point to acknowledge that these three things have to be in balance and they're all on the same level. I can't say what I want to say at the expense
Yeah.
of the truth in the data or the expense of audience need. They must be aligned. And if
Mm.
you line those three things up, then they answer every question you have. Like what's the PowerPoint deck title? What goes on this
Yeah.
slide? Which chart should I use? How do I design the chart? What labels do I put on there? Always comes
Mm.
back to those three questions. So literally, there's like the macro level quays, and then
Yeah.
the
Beautiful.
micro moments all have their individual quays. And if you just focus on those three things, all your problems are solved. At least they
Mm.
start to be
Yeah.
solved.
Yeah, and I think it starts the process of you discovering or distilling more and more the key message of what you're trying to share. And I think
Yeah.
that's yeah, we're so inundated by information, by things that are trying to take our attention away, social media, emails, are pinging all the time. So if we can present a message that is super clear and super distilled and aligned to what our audience needs to slash wants to hear,
Yeah.
then you've solved quite a big part of the puzzle, right?
Yeah. A phrase that I
I
always use is that you have to be a ruthless editor. It's better to be a ruthless editor than a good writer or designer or anything. But how can you
Yeah,
be a ruthless editor unless you know what you're editing and why? And that is driven by the whys. Like, what does my
yeah,
audience need? Anything that my audience doesn't need gets hacked, like
yeah,
ruthlessly, you know? So if I
yes,
hone in on those three things, then I know what can be kept and what everything else can be just tossed.
yeah, yeah. I love that. And I find that there are so many similarities to change and business transformation where, there's a big program of work that has started, or we're talking about changing an organization. A lot of the change these days tends to be driven by decreasing cost or trying to increase efficiency, whatever those things may be. But like the real story really gets lost in the narrative because when a project is being communicated, all of this extra communication and extra information is trying to be put into a slide deck versus what is the actual message that we're trying to deliver. Let's distill
Yeah.
that and let's be super clear with our employees or with the organization where are we headed to. Um, what about people feeling a little bit out of depth when we're talking about data visualizations and storytelling? Like I think a lot of us have to do it for day in and day out, but we don't necessarily consider ourselves data engineers or data designers.
Yeah.
How can one pick up, you know, doing your courses on LinkedIn Learning, I think it's definitely one thing. But how can we give little snippets of insights to our audience now to give them that clarity and that confidence that they can do it?
So this may be a bit of a ramble, but I'll try to cover it efficiently. There's a couple components to that. Number one, depending on what you do, what your role is, and how
Mm,
familiar and comfortable you are working with data at all, um,
yes.
developing your data literacy and your data analytics skills can be important. And I
Mm,
will say very quickly, it's not required. If you work in an organization where you have
right.
colleagues who are doing the data analysis and all you need to do
Yeah.
is sort of have them tell you what the key insights are and then you're just packaging it up, that's cool. Like if other people are going to do the data and the analytics, then you can just be the data communicator. And so that eliminates that first problem potentially.
Mm.
But if you have to analyze your own data, then develop those skills for sure, because the deeper insights you can gain from your data beyond just, well, 42% of blah, blah, blah is yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
You can't tell sophisticated data stories unless you have somewhat sophisticated data
Mm.
insights.
Yeah.
So that being said, let's assume you either have those skills or you have a good partner to work with to get those insights. Then the second part, the second sort of challenge a lot of people have is, and this comes in sort of two ends of the spectrum. Let's say you are and I don't want to disparage anybody or stereotype things, but let's say you're you're an HR, you're not a data person, but you
Yeah.
have a lot of data. I mean, HR people have tons
Mm-hmm.
of data they have to work with.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Yes.
and you need to communicate those insights upstairs, and you're feeling
Mm.
overwhelmed by the numbers, maybe, if you're that particular type of a person.
Yeah.
The most important advice I can give to that person is, especially if you're working with a partner who's going to tell you the insights,
Mm.
step back from the data. Forget
Mm.
about the numbers. Don't freak out about the numbers. The numbers are just numbers. Like, who cares? The key thing is if you understand the big idea. So as an
Yeah.
example in HR, oh, we had 42% of turnover among our
Mm.
employees last year. Okay, 376 employees out of 500 and blah, 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 46%. Okay, wait, 370. How many? Wait, what's the math there? Forget about the
Yeah.
stupid math.
Mm.
42% turnover, literally almost half of our people are disappearing every single year. Oh my
Mm.
goodness, we have a major problem.
Yeah.
That's your data story. It's the
Yeah.
idea, it's not the stupid numbers. So
Mm.
forget about the numbers. Work with a partner, figure out the insights, and that's what you tell your story
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Interestingly, that's that person. At the other end of the spectrum, we have our scientists, data analysts who are like very comfortable
Data
working with the
nerd.
numbers. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Total data nerds.
Yeah.
They get the numbers 372 out of 500, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you the standard deviation and the P value
Mm.
and the R squared. Oh, what language is he speaking? Right. Like those people are totally fine with that. Guess
Yeah.
what? I have the same advice for them.
Yeah.
Step back from the numbers. So for those people, they're obsessed with the numbers and into the numbers. These people are afraid of and overwhelmed by the numbers,
Mm.
but they
Yeah.
both, it's the same advice. What you have to do is step back from the numbers and remember you're a human. You know how to tell
Mm.
stories. Like when
Yeah.
I teach data storytelling, I'm not teaching sophisticated storytelling techniques. Like I was an English major,
Mm.
who cares? Like it's not about plot, protagonists, all this other stuff, although I talk about that a little bit.
Mm.
Mostly you as a human with 50,000 years of evolution, you know in your gut how to
What is
express an idea. So
Yeah.
when you get hung up on the numbers, you sort of forget that. It literally just like swoops out of our brains. Step back from the numbers. Don't freak out or be obsessed with the numbers. Just figure out the insights and communicate those, because the
Yeah.
insights is where the magic is.
Yeah. 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 I love that. Um, I think a number of times you talk in the courses about stepping back from the data. I think that's a few of the times that I heard it mentioned is once you've developed some sort of an initial storyboard, step back and let it sort of develop overnight, almost sleep on it. And you've got another brilliant acronym for that one, and I can't remember it, something WAR squared, and I get lost. But the other thing I think, which you just mentioned, is stepping back and appreciating the data and the story versus being driven by some sort of a tool or a dashboard or Excel spreadsheet or Tableau or whatever tool that you'd be using, Power BI. I think a lot
Yeah,
of the times we get hung up on the tools rather than on the story, and I've
definitely.
experienced that number over and over again. Trying to do some sort of presentation deck for executives or for a board. We go, oh, what type of chart should I use for this, and what are the types of charts that I have in PowerPoint, and being driven by this rather than being driven by the story itself. And I know you're passionate about this, and you talk about not being driven by a tool, just thinking about the steps that are involved. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about this, because I found that when you convey that message, it's really powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, you just said it, right? Like, think about like the way most people, they're going to put a presentation together. What do they do first?
Mm.
They open up PowerPoint.
Yeah.
That's literally like
Look,
the first thing they
look
do.
at the templates.
Yeah, let me start cranking out slides. I'll figure out what goes on them and how it works later. Like they just start like doing.
Yeah.
And the most important thing you can do, like you said, you need to sleep on it. You need to step back. You need to let it percolate, and you need to focus on the storyboard, the idea.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, the key is, you nail your whys. If you understand your whys, then you can
Yes.
move on to storytelling. Storytelling is not about the tools. Storytelling is about what is the
Mm.
narrative structure and how am I going to make it flow. So if I can
Yeah.
figure out the order, I know I'm going to tell a story about like how I arranged my desk this morning.
Mm.
Well, I always like to have warm liquids on my desk. So I brought my thermos of warm liquids and I put it on my desk first. That's my first priority. Second
Yeah.
priority is I know that I'm going to be doing some stuff, phone calls. So I got my AirPods
Mm.
going. Got to have
Yeah.
that in order. And it's kind of cold in my office. So I often have a hat, even when it's like kind of warm outside.
Mm. Yeah.
That's the order I wanted to tell that story in. That's a beautiful story, wasn't it? Like those are the three things in order, and I made it flow, sort of combined by a theme or blah blah
Yeah.
blah. Connector
Yeah.
words makes it all work. Okay, I didn't make a deck. I thought about how to express those ideas.
Yeah.
Now I can open up PowerPoint and I can say, okay,
Mm.
I'm going to do a slide or two about the drink and a slide or two about the things and a slide or two about that. And I'm going to have maybe photography for this one and maybe a diagram for that one and something else for this one over here, a chart about all my different hats. Like now I can start thinking about how to actually execute on those ideas, but the ideas have to come first. And by the way, to the point about tools, you want to be driven by your tools, which is a terrible idea generally,
Mm.
but this is the best tool in your toolkit right here. Okay. You
Mm.
must get a whiteboard or even just pen and paper, obviously, and sketch your ideas. Like play with your ideas visually like this. You can sketch quickly, make
Yeah. Right.
mistakes, iterate
Yes.
on ideas. Once I agree, oh yeah, this is the right thing to do,
Yeah.
chart selection, label, all the rest of it. Now I'll
Hmm.
fight my software and execute on it. And if my software can't do this chart type, like maybe I decide to do this. Does PowerPoint have one of
Yeah.
these?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe not. Darn it. Well, maybe I'll find another tool, or maybe I can simplify this
Mm.
idea so I can execute it in the tool that I actually have at hand.
Mm.
But I'm going to
Yeah.
start there. Like
Yes.
I'm going to come up with the best idea I can first.
Yeah. I like that approach, and I like the fact that you draw it out first and you kind of solidify the idea in your head versus trying to put it in a tool and then figuring it out in the tool or finding the limitations of the tool and then being frustrated by that. It's like
Yeah.
a whole different story.
And
Um,
you have to balance that, to be honest. Like, so you'll fight your software and then you get frustrated, like you just said, and it can be a disaster. And now I still have to pick a chart and I haven't even gotten
yeah.
anywhere. To be fair, I decided I wanted to do this chart and this is the best idea. Then I go to open up my software and the software has that chart. Cool, I'm in good shape. But then it turns out when I finally do load my live data in, it turns out that chart isn't actually insightful because the data it
Mm.
doesn't follow an interesting pattern. Now I do have
Yeah.
to choose something else sometimes, but I'll go back to that first. I
Yeah.
won't usually fight my software to come up with the second idea. Now, that
Mm.
being said, like sometimes it's very easy to click a bunch of buttons in software and generate 10 different charts. Sometimes that'll help me ideate, but I'll almost always go back to the whiteboard as part of that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Um, in change and business transformation, it's very important that you bring people on a journey with you through the thinking process and then to kind of discover the end result together almost,
Yeah.
co-create the change. When we're talking about thinking about the data that you're presenting, and I suppose, thinking it from a person or a team's perspective, what is your experience that you've gathered during those 30 years? That how is the best way to bring people on that journey? Like, would you communicate an early version of that chart or of that data story and say, look, this is what the idea is. How do you take this? How do you make sure that the stakeholders are with you on that journey? How do you know that they're wise?
Yeah. It's really interesting. So I would say that particularly in data storytelling, um, you don't always want to do that. Only
Mm.
because, and especially for like the data analyst, and I'll explain why. So like the data analyst is always tempted to walk into the room and start by explaining the methodology. Oh, well,
Right.
we talked to 100 people and we asked them these 6 questions and da 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 da. And now they've talked for 15 minutes about the stupid methodology and everyone's fallen asleep and we haven't gotten to the good stuff yet. That's a
Yeah,
problem.
right.
Secondly, they will show you, well, so then we did a chi-square test, then we did a a regression, and then we did a
Mm.
blah, blah, blah. And they explain the 47 steps that they took. And it turns out one simple pie chart could explain the actual insight that matters for that meeting. And so a lot of
Yeah, right.
CYA, a lot of explaining, showing how smart we are and how much hard work we did, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
Now, if I'm presenting to the CEO who needs to make a very serious decision very quickly based on like the key insight, I'm not doing any of that stuff, right? It'll be in the appendix
Yeah.
in case they really ask the questions, but
Yeah.
I'm going to skip right past it. But sometimes it's exactly as you described it. Sometimes you do want to walk people through that journey, in which case, I'm trying to think of an example. I did a project. No, it wasn't a project. I was developing the curriculum for a data analytics course for one of the big four
Mm.
firms.
Yeah.
And we essentially analyzed this fake data set and then we created a pretend presentation, data story out of this data set.
Yeah.
One of the slides in the story was a whole bunch of little charts. And like the point of the story was we were looking at coffee consumption data. Which countries drink
Right.
a lot of coffee because we're trying to sell them coffee is the basic idea.
Yeah.
And on this one slide in the presentation, I showed like 6 different little scatter plots. And that slide was telling the story of, we looked at a whole bunch of stuff and we looked at this and we looked at this and we looked at this and this and this. And by the way, these 5 out of the 6 told us nothing, but this one was the magic. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a CYA, a bit of a look at how all the hard work we did,
Yeah,
but it was
right.
for a reason because we knew that for that particular data story, the executives needed to understand. Yeah, we did consider the obvious things like, GDP and
Mm.
logistics and, supply chain and labor market, blah, blah, blah. But it turns out, guys, it's all about GDP. So that's why
Yeah.
we're going to recommend whatever we're going to recommend in the story. So yeah,
Mhm.
sometimes you walk through it by sort of touching on the things that got you to the final insight, but other times you kind of skip past it because that, particularly in data storytelling, that how the sausage is made stuff can be
Yeah.
overwhelming, boring,
Yeah.
and distracting rather than
Mm.
helpful.
Yeah. 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 That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. I think from having sort of my consulting hat on from years of my stints in consulting, um, it's really important to understand who you're presenting to and what the audience wants to hear. Like going back to the quiz,
100%.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tricky. It's almost like a balance act of knowing how much you present and and not presenting too much of the methodology that you've used, because then you get lost
Yeah.
into the detail and it doesn't necessarily convey the insight that you've acquired through the journey.
Yeah. And it's about levels, right? CEO gets a different
Mm,
story from the mid-level manager. It's also
that's
about
right.
vertical, right? Like
Yeah.
if it's an big HR change management thing, it's going to be,
Yeah.
heavily on the details for these people. But like
Mm,
in IT, maybe gets a heavy detail because their systems have to change. But
yeah.
like the operations team over here doesn't really need to hear all that detail. So it's both
Yeah.
horizontal and vertical differentiation in the story. And then, yeah,
Mm,
it's what do they want and need to hear? And what tasks does that person need to perform with this information you're
yeah.
sharing with them? If it's just like change management, like you said, it's like I kind of want to understand everything because I need to buy into it to change my
Mm,
behavior. But if I'm a mid-level manager who needs to execute plans A, B, C, and D, that's a different story and maybe more specific and detailed. But yeah,
yes.
it's so nuanced and it's different every time sometimes,
Yes. And I think you almost want to have access to that whole data set, if you wish, from, looking at it from a change perspective or from a business transformation perspective, so that you can tailor the story depending on the audience.
Yeah.
So you do want that a little bit depth into data literacy. You do want that bit deeper into how you would present the data, and what bits you take out for different audiences.
Yeah.
And and almost, and what you're talking about as well is understanding the audience, and knowing, who wants to hear what. So that's part of change, part of data storytelling. It's all sort of merging the lines. It's very synchronous, I find.
It's true.
And that's
Well, what's
that's
funny is
what
that,
yeah,
I mean,
sorry,
data
go ahead.
storytelling now is literally everything and everywhere because
Hmm.
everybody has data to communicate. We're all doing it.
Yes.
We're all cranking out PowerPoint decks and
Yeah.
dashboards and whatnot. And
Yeah.
if everybody does it, that means it literally is kind of everything. I mean, it's
Hmm.
amazing how ubiquitous the skill set really should be.
Yeah. Yeah. In one of the previous conversations we had, we talked about what makes a good, powerful story when it comes to data, and what doesn't. Um, and I was hoping that we can pick on this here, just so we can give people, maybe the few things that they need to make sure that they've really nailed down, like a few of the tick boxes that they need to tick before they go, oh yeah, I've got it. This is a good story.
Yeah. It's interesting. There are a lot of little things. I mean, number one, I think I alluded to this earlier. The basic idea is, you know, a data story isn't a single number, right?
Right.
42% of people prefer strawberry ice cream to chocolate chip. That's
Yes.
just like one fact. So
Yeah.
data story is sort of, it's what's required is a collection of ideas, maybe for it to be a true
Hmm.
story.
Hmm.
Uh, Ideally, those insights have some heft, nuance, complexity, something to them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, again, it's just maybe it's just a few facts thrown together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, so that doesn't mean you can't tell a simple data story. Data stories can be simple, but they need to be, I need to care for it to be a true story, right? It's not just like, well, we have this monthly meeting and it's the same darn numbers every single month. And this month, this number went up, this one went down. That's a meeting. That's not really much of a story.
Yeah.
Although you can still do a better job telling that story, even if it's not the most exciting story in the world. Now, data stories also, good ones, are, effectively communicate these interesting
Hmm.
insights. And that means, when it comes to the words, you're expressive with your words. It doesn't mean you need to
Yes.
be Ernest Hemingway, but you can be, you know, this number increased by 6%. The
Hmm.
number grew slightly, right? This number went up by 87%. An explosion of growth. And like, obviously, you maybe can't be quite as expressive depending on the context, but, expressive words is good. And good data stories are visual. I mean, this is just like
Hmm.
proven by research. Human beings are not good at looking at a table of numbers and making sense of them. End of
Hmm.
discussion. And so
Yes.
if you have any quantity of numbers beyond like a couple, you got to make a visual for it to
Yeah.
really be understood, and to be understood subconsciously and pre-attentively, which is a whole thing we can talk about if you want to. But the basic idea is humans will respond in a very fast way to a visual. Therefore, they immediately see the insight. And now whatever you
Hmm.
say about it, it's connecting with the other parts of their brain and saying, oh yeah, that bar is twice as tall. She said it's 50, 100% larger. Got it. Makes sense. Move on.
Yeah.
It's going to stick in my skull if the words and the visual are both telling the same story. So those are a
Yeah.
couple things.
Fantastic.
I'm sure I could say 20 more things, but
I think when you picked up on the visual stuff, and we haven't really spoken about the visuals too much, we were concentrating on the data storytelling, but it is so
yeah,
true. And, with, especially when I think you quoted some research in one of the courses that talks about, how well we retain information when when it has a visual with it. Um, Now, if we talk about what makes a good visual, I'm sure, you know, how long is a piece of string. But at the same time, there are certain techniques with colors. There's certain techniques with what it makes a good graph or good presentation for that particular data set.
Yeah.
And there's a tool in one of the talks that you quoted by the Financial Times, and I know you've got a short version of that tool, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I know that people would be interested in how do I pick the right visual for my data and how do I make it impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think of creating visuals, especially for data stories, in sort of two parts. And I always teach it this way.
Yeah.
First part, and this is not, I mean, it's sort of in order, but the basic idea is you do have to pick a chart. You have to actually pick the right visual to display that data. And yeah, the Financial Times created a tool called the Visual Vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And the visual vocabulary is a collection of charts organized in these categories. And the thing to understand there is that when you're communicating data, you're generally performing different tasks, or you want your audience to perform different tasks with that data. For instance, I'm showing you these two employees' sales figures for last quarter. Probably I'm showing it to you because you want to compare those two numbers to each other, because you want to decide who to fire or who to promote or whatever. Okay. That task of comparison means you're going to pick charts that are good for enabling precise comparison.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not at all about comparison. Maybe all I need to do is show you the trend over time of sales for the company. Odds are you want to look at a line chart for that. And so, long story short, the visual vocabulary by Financial Times is organized by these keywords: comparison, trends, change over time,
Fantastic. Yeah.
composition with part-to-whole relationships like segmentation, correlation, distribution, these other words. And so once you translate the thing you want to do into one of these 6 or 7 or 8 words, you can cheat and use the Financial Times or one of these other tools to sort of pick the right chart for that category.
Yeah.
So that's one. Like for the hands-on, like everyone watching this can pick, go look at the visual vocabulary tool, and it'll help you pick the right chart. So that's the first part. The second part of creating visuals, and this is definitely like a magical thing once you understand it, is this. Every visual experience you have in your entire life, every visual experience occurs in a way what's called pre-attentively, meaning before you're paying attention. So it's instantaneous, it's subconscious, okay? And so the example is, this morning when, I'm sure 42% of our audience walked into Starbucks and bought a coffee. When you walk into a space, you have an immediate pre-attentive response to it, meaning you subconsciously have a sense of how large is this space? Where is there room for me to walk around? Is it crowded? Am I going to bump into things? Where? That pre-attentive response is also occurring when you look at charts. So literally you see a chart pre-attentively, you say, oh, that bar is way bigger than that bar, or that line's going like this. And like that response is, it's brain science. You can't even help it. So who cares? What does that mean? Well, what it means is that if we understand our audience will respond pre-attentively, quickly, and if we know the story we're trying to tell, so we're coming back to the story here, what we want to do in design is orient our design so that we trigger that pre-attentive response in our audience in a way that helps them see the story. So as an example, I have 50 salespeople in my company, and I care about you, my audience, seeing the trend over time of their sales. But I especially need you to look at Susie Jones, because Susie, she's on the bubble. We're not sure. We might need to fire her, or maybe she's about to be promoted. We're not sure, but we're honing in on her. So I'm going to show you the line chart with 49 gray, subtle lines, faded back, whatever. And then boom, a big, bright green line for Susie Jones.
Here comes Susie.
So that when you glance at this chart, you see the context, yes, but mostly you're like, holy crap, there's Susie, right? And so I'm not can't force anybody to do anything, but I'm highly suggesting subconsciously to your brain, you might want to look at this without removing anything else, but I can subdue everything else. So again, the phrase I always use, I want to trigger a pre-attentive response in you to enable you to see the story. Not because every chart can or should be understood at a glance, but I orient my design to that glance. And if you just do that,
Yeah.
so to your question about like color, blah blah blah, everything is faded back. Everything is a light gray. I'm trying
You're
to
right.
minimize everything, and I'm going to use color, contrast, thickness to emphasize the stuff to tell the story that
Mm-hmm.
needs telling. Aligned with
Mm-hmm.
what again? The quais, right? I know what you
Yeah,
need
right.
for me is to learn about Susie. So I'm going to
Yeah.
orient the design towards Susie. That's it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's so powerful, and I know that you have a few really good examples in the courses. If people want to see good examples of data presentations or data storytelling, what is the best place for them to go and have a look? I mean, the tools are great. Like we open PowerPoint and there's the templates, and I think you kind of go, oh, do I like these colors? Do I like how this graph looks? But you don't necessarily, you're not driven by this has been a really powerful story, data storytelling and
Yeah.
visualization example. So, in your years of experience, I think it'll be really helpful if you can point people to some really good examples. They can go, oh, yeah, this is similar to the message I'd like to convey. So I can sort of take that example. I'm a great believer of not reinventing the wheel and not copy and pasting, but at the same time, taking the idea that has worked and applying it to something similar.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can tell you the best data storytelling and data visualization being done on earth right now is being
Yeah.
done in journalism. So
Yeah. Right.
if you follow the graphics teams at the New York Times,
Mm-hmm.
Reuters, South China Morning Post, Der Spiegel in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
ProPublica, these organizations are doing the best work in the world. Now, some
Yeah.
of the
Right.
data stories they're creating are kind of fancy, bespoke, special visuals that you're not going to
Yeah.
be able to use in your PowerPoint deck. But they're creating a lot of pretty darn normal looking charts, but they're just
Mm-hmm.
doing it very, very well. They're doing both a good job with the data analysis. They're bubbling up really interesting insights. But
Yeah.
then, even when it's a simple insight, they're expressing it visually very, very, very effectively. So, if you
Mm.
don't want to individually sort of chase all those organizations necessarily, although you should, but there's
Yeah.
also like, if you look at the Information is Beautiful Awards, which is now hosted
Oh, wow.
by
Okay.
the Data Visualization Society, which I used to be on the
Yeah.
board of. Um, go
Fantastic.
look at the awards, like who won the awards last year. And it's a huge, and you can look at the long list of people who like sort of made like the finals
Mm-hmm.
and the semifinals
Mm-hmm.
before the awards. You're going to find a lot of good work up there, including, like I said, some like normal charts as well as sort of fancier things. And those are great places to start. And, they're books by people like David McCandless, with
Right.
really good examples of very simple visualizations. And simple does not mean easy to execute. The simple just meaning clean and precise and great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, just, very simply executed ideas. So those are
Yeah.
some
Beautiful.
ideas. And, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's important to give people examples of what good looks like, because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, if you haven't got much experience or you're just venturing into that field, you will be looking for some of those examples and some of that narrative that comes with it.
Especially
Um,
like you're in a company and your boss says, "Oh, Joe
yes.
made a great chart yesterday and he loves it." And you go look at it and it's like, "Oh my God, like 8 million things going on. I have no idea." That's not good. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
much easier to look at things that are truly good and to
Yeah.
be driven
Yeah.
sort of towards that, ideal, the art of the possible.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Bill, we are coming to the top of our time, and it's been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for spending your time here with us.
Thank
If
you.
people wanted to get in touch with you or wanted some of your wisdom, what is the best place for them to get in contact?
I mean, I have a website, billshander.com, and or here on LinkedIn is always a good option. If you just search my name, you're going to find me, whether it's on the LinkedIn Learning part of the site or just my regular profile.
Yeah, fantastic. And I thoroughly recommend both courses. They're absolutely amazing. The concepts are presented in such a clear way. And as I've said, I've taken away a lot of insights from those courses. So if you have a chance, I I thoroughly recommend it.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
once again, Bill. This has been wonderful, and I look forward to picking more of that wisdom in the future. Thanks.
Thank
Take
you very
care.
much. Bye bye.
Bye.